Well, good morning to you and welcome. Welcome to another edition of the Art Lewis Show here on WSGW, coming to you from my Second on Spirit home studio. Lots happening later on after the 10 o'clock news this morning. We'll talk to attorney Ven Johnson. We'll get an update on the damn lawsuits that he's involved in. At 11 o'clock, Herman Hiss will be on Focus talking about an upcoming event. But for a good part of this hour, we're probably going to scare the heck out of you because we're going to be talking about your data, who knows it, and what happens to it when you're online. And with us to talk about it, returning for another visit, he owns a company called TRU Staffing Partners. They specialize in data and cybersecurity staffing, and he is Jared Coseglia. Jared, good morning to you.
Good morning, Art. Great to be with everyone. Thanks for having me back.
Good to see you. And by the way, you can watch us, folks, on the usual places: Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all those good things, twitch.tv. So I guess, when I saw Hillary sent out this note about data security and data brokers, and I said to myself, there's enough money in it that there are brokers selling my name and what I'm interested in. Is that right?
Well, there's not just enough money, Art. It is $1 billion industry.
It's been nice talking to you, Jared.
Look, I think it's important for everyone to start understanding a distinction between data security and data privacy, because they're not commonly understood differentiations to your average Joe citizen. And security is about keeping that data protected, keeping that data from falling into nefarious hands, the hands of hackers. But data privacy is about something, in my opinion, much more nuanced, much more complex, much less regulated at a state, federal, and global level. And as a result, it's created an ecosystem that allows people to buy and sell your data in a variety of different venues in order to monetize their businesses. The entire marketing industry has changed. It used to be, how many times do I see that ad on the side of a bus? And by the 11th time, I'll probably be more inclined to call that company to do business. Now, companies are much more focused on finding out who you are, what you want, and how to get directly to you to sell that message.
So I assume that every time I accept cookies, for example, I'm giving them the go-ahead to do exactly what you're talking about.
Well, the question is, who is them? In one instance, it might be Google. And in the next instance, Google may distribute that data to dozens, if not hundreds of other third and fourth party service providers who are using, aggregating, potentially even anonymizing that data so that it doesn't directly, according to them, link back to you, although we can unpack the ability for people to draw data back to individual users. But yes, that data is distributed and monetized in a variety of different ways when you approve cookies.
So is the result of that, at least in this form, if I go on to the XYZ website because they make a widget and I'm interested in their widget, and I look at it, I don't buy it. I just scan it and say, oh yeah, there's the widget. And then I get off that page and I go on with my business. The next day when I open up almost any site, there's ad boxes all over the place and there's that widget staring me in the face every day. Is that a result of what you're talking about?
100%. I'm a big gardener. In my spare time, I like to buy flowers and bulbs online. Now, because certain websites I've given cookie approvals to have distributed that data, and now all the online advertising I see is for bulbs and flowers for as far as the eye can see on the internet. So yes, that's exactly why. And what's important for consumers to begin to appreciate, understand, and most importantly, participate in is becoming aware of the companies, whether it's a visit to a website or a visit to their mall, shopping center, store, what exactly their policies are around the collection and use, whether it's selling or distributing of your personal data.
What's interesting too is this is not a perfect system because I could buy that widget and the ads continue. They don't know that I bought it, or they're trying to sell me a dozen more. I don't know which it is, but I have the widget in my possession and I'm still getting bombarded with widget ads.
Correct, because they're profiling your identity, and they may not even be profiling you specifically, Art, but rather people who are like Art, and you fit into buckets of identifiable groups of people that like to buy this particular widget. And so an algorithm somewhere in somebody's artificial intelligence programming is directing the advertising to show you this widget. Absolutely.
And I have to believe that it works. The reason I say that is it wouldn't be there if it didn't. Somebody must be buying that widget when they see it after the 40th time.
Well, Google and Facebook wouldn't be two of the biggest companies in the world if it wasn't working, because that's how most of their revenue is derived, is by online advertising. And that advertising is paid for with a premium because it is coupled with an acute, intelligent analysis of individual user data in order to target marketing for people who are more likely to buy your product.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong then, these data brokers, other than having nothing more than a computer, can go into business.
Well, look, the thing that they really need to do is create some federal legislation to help regulate the use of data. Right now in the United States, we see data privacy as a consumer right. As buyers of products, we have a right to know what companies are doing with our consumer data. But in Europe, in Brazil, and to somewhat Canada and other areas of the world, privacy is considered a human right. And because it is a human right, the ownership of the data aggregated by the individual is ultimately owned by the user. Not the case here in the United States. And as a result, companies who are United States based and may do business in other parts of the world differently than they do in the United States are weaponizing the ability to use data without oversight at a federal level in order to monetize their businesses to the nth degree. And under this administration, it's unlikely we're going to see federal legislation for data privacy, and it's unlikely we'll see it in whoever's next, whether it's a re-election or a Republican. And as a result, this wild, wild west environment of using end users' data in order to monetize businesses is likely to not only continue for another 4 to 10 years, but exacerbate.
Can I interrupt that flow?
Yeah.
Do I have, the tools to be able to say no?
Yes. So as a result of Apple's changing their policies in their iOS rollout in, I think, version 14 or 15, you now have a lot more control over blocking the ability for apps to aggregate and collect data. But has the education to the general consumer been sufficient enough for everybody who owns an iPhone everywhere in the world or some other form of phone know how to create the setting patterns that will block that data? Part of a cornerstone of good data privacy is simplicity, along with transparency. And companies that are choosing to be more simple and more transparent about their privacy policies are actually attracting and retaining more customers, because privacy leads to trust. And trust may be the greatest commodity that any American business has right now in order to retain and grow their customer base.
All right, Jared, hang on. I got to take a break. We're talking to Jared Coseglia, and we're talking about your data privacy and more ahead here on WSGW. All right, we're back with you on the Art Lewis Show, talking to Jared Coseglia, and he is the owner of TRU Staffing, and it's a company that deals in data and cybersecurity specialists. And just as a little background, TRU Staffing Partners, how did it come about, Jared?
Yeah, so I started TRU Staffing Partners back in 2010 and was actually in the e-discovery business, which is supporting litigation from an electronic records perspective, and started to see that data usage and data protection was going to be a huge vertical. Then in 2014, which is a pivotal moment in the cybersecurity chronology, the Sony hacks occurred. and we thought it was nation state, North Korea. And we just, as an organization, went full throttle into representing professionals in security. And then very quickly after, data privacy. What became very clear to me around 2015, 2016, and this is before GDPR rolled out in Europe in 2018, is that the lack of regulation and the complexities around international use of data were going to lead to an incredibly high demand for professionals who understood both the legal and the technology necessary to consult and advise and become authorities on data privacy and protection.
Are those folks out there? Are there enough young people coming into the world saying, gee, I'm going to be in the data business?
Well, yes and no. I think there are a lot of wonderfully talented people who've been in this business or have touched privacy in some tertiary capacity, but there is still going to be an explosive growth of job opportunities in this vertical. I just came back from Washington, D.C., where the biggest privacy conference of the year was led by a keynote from Tim Cook at Apple, which just goes to show you how this industry and community is in the spotlight for big tech companies in America, particularly while it's an industry that remains highly unlegislated. And as a result, we're finding more and more people are becoming aware and attracted to the industry, but they come from all different walks of life. And the amazing thing about data privacy that is a little bit different than, say, cybersecurity, which is a very technical discipline at the end of the day, is that data privacy touches all parts of the business. How you're using and wielding data, whether it's your own employee data in human resources, whether it's customer data being wielded by marketing, whether it's understanding how you use data and winning over the trust of regulators in order to influence the laws at a national, state, and global level. There's room for professionals everywhere, from lobbying to technical development to engineers, to find a way to move into privacy.
All right, I want to clarify again this notion of security versus privacy. Let me give you my examples and see how close I am. A security specialist will come up with ways to prevent me from getting malware, hacked, and all of that. A privacy specialist deals in what under the law is legal use of my data, even if I don't want it to do it, but it's legal. How close?
Let me give you a metaphor. It's the best metaphor for me in describing the difference. Security are the bars on your window. Privacy are the shades. We don't want anyone getting in. And there are only so many ways to put bars on your window to make sure people don't get in. But what kind of shades you put on your window, what level of opacity, can they see in? Are they pulled open? When are they pulled open? What kind of pattern do they have? What kind of fabric? There's so many, literally, shades of gray when it comes to how you want to treat your window dressings. And part of the reason why we have that level of flexibility is because of the lack of legislation. So your assessment is absolutely accurate. I love this metaphor because it's a really simple way to think of separating the two.
All right. So I'm sitting here in front of my computer. I'll take the phones out of it for a minute, even though they're computers in your hand. Do I have the power on my computer to pull down a black shade and say no to the use of my data?
Well, yes. The question is, do you have the ability and know-how to do that? And it may not be a centralized solution where you click a button and the whole computer has a screen down in front of it. You may need to actually go into every web browser, every different application that you use, and make sure those settings are set to a full shade down. But Art, here's the complexity. Once you do that on your computer, it's only good from the moment you do it moving forward. There's still years and years and years of Art Lewis going online and what's he looking at, and we're saving all that data out there in the world, right? So there's a process that we call DSAR, which is DSAR, which is Data Subject Access Request. And this is something that most consumers, particularly in California under the CCPA, are allowed to reach out to companies and say, I want you to delete all my data. And there are entire practice groups inside companies like the FANG stocks and others that are specifically dedicated to receiving, responding, and deleting data at the requests of consumers. So obviously, the bigger the company, the more complex the amount or complexity of DSAR requests they might get. But that's part of the process too. It's not just on your device. You would actually have to go back and communicate with the companies that hold the data and request that it be deleted.
So when I look at that widget, and all of a sudden I start getting widget ads, has that widget company paid to be included in this data?
Well, they paid for something because that widget advertisement is getting in front of you. So they're paying someone somewhere for the distribution of their advertising. The question is, what are they getting in return? They may not be getting any of your data, but they might also be getting click rates. How many people clicked on this? What people clicked on it? Is geolocation part of their package with their marketing company? Are they tracking where people are clicking? Are they getting data back from the marketing company that says, hey, listen, this advertisement gets clicked on a lot more in Saginaw than it does in New York City. Spend more money advertising in Saginaw. All of that information is part of a package that the end company has purchased. The question is, what is the nature of that contract?
So if Europe has seen the light and come up with legislation, what's holding up the United States?
Well, I think we could debate a little while whether or not they've seen the light and whether or not their legislation is ultimately what's best for consumers. A lot of American companies would counter argue that assertion by saying, listen, the ability to use data in this way allows us to get the actual products that consumers want in front of them for the best possible price at the right time more effectively. So instead of having to pack up your car, go shopping, window shop for what you're looking for, advertisers are now trying to come to you to say, hey, we know you probably want this, and let us give you the best possible deal for this product. So the question isn't really, is Europe ahead of the US curve? The question is really what, as we as a society, are going to choose to define our culture with as it relates to our digital footprint. And do we believe that our digital footprint is a human right as it relates to the ownership of that data, or is the data, once it's created in an aggregated, public domain?
Am I safe to assume Amazon is a player in this field?
Of course. Art, you're safe to assume that I'm a player in this field. Everyone is a player in this field. This is how marketing is done now. And to ignore that this is the new world order as it relates to advertising is to ignore the potential of your business.
Hang on, we'll be back. We're talking to Jared Coseglia about data privacy and security, and we will have more of it when we return here on the Art Lewis Show. We're talking to Jared Coseglia, True Staffing Partners is his company. They specialize in folks who work in the data privacy and security industries, talking about data. So realistically, Jared, I'm sitting here at my computer at home, and I deny all cookies. And I go into my system and I erase all cookies. Now, it doesn't get rid of what's out there that's been out there. Does it stop the forward movement?
To some extent. I mean, again, you'd have to look at what you're doing on your personal devices as well. This would include any kind of iPad, iPhone, Google device, Android device. They're all going to have their own settings. They're all going to be collecting data in a slightly different way based on the manufacturer's built-in default settings for privacy, which, as I mentioned, Apple had built in some pretty aggressive ones, so much so that, as you may have seen, it caused a decline in almost $10 billion of estimated revenue for Facebook, which is at this point a digital rival of Apple. And that affected the stock price, dropped it by almost 50%.
I want to turn to something else. I don't know if you'll have an opinion on this or not. Much in the news these days is a fellow by the name of Elon Musk. And he has now apparently purchased Twitter in its entirety. Has to be approved by the mucky mucks in Washington and all of that. What's going to happen? How is it going to change the world? Will it?
Well, I think Twitter has already changed the world. What I'll share with you next is really my opinion, which is Twitter for me and most of the people I think in my generation, I'm Gen X, so we were one of the first users of Twitter, has always been about news. So it will be really interesting to see if they take the pivot towards becoming more of a news outlet, right? You hear about it on Twitter before you see it on TV these days. And sometimes Twitter is considered to be a more truthful representation of news as a result of it being reported by actual individuals and not news organizations that may lean in today's society to the right or to the left with very little in the middle. And that'll be really interesting to see.
That's an interesting comment from the journalistic side. We look at it and we say, well, yeah, I understand what you said, but also it's all unverified. It all hasn't gone through the professional standards of journalism, even though journalism is suspect today, the way you described it on the national level, particularly. I mean, there's a lot to be careful for when you're on Twitter. I mean, you really do have to take it with a grain of salt to a degree, don't you?
Well, back to the use of data, I think the question will be, how will Elon rewrite the algorithms to analyze the data being put in by users, and then what actions will be automated or taken by an adjudicating board once the data tells them that somebody is leading misinformation out on the internet, or somebody is promoting hate crimes, or somebody is disseminating things that may lead to public violence. And then what do they do? That will be the question. And will Elon institutionalize journalistic integrity into the algorithms that analyze the data put in by users in order to give the brand trust? Because that's all that we really want, right? If we trust Twitter, it won't matter. We'll trust what comes out of it because we trust the brand, not the individual users.
And so he's spending $46 billion, whatever the number is, to get Twitter. I understand how Amazon, how Google monetize data. How does Twitter earn its money?
Well, they haven't done as good of a job at it as Facebook and Google. That's clear. And that's been the critique, I think, of the organization since the beginning, is that they're not as invested in the advertisement, marketing, revenue generating machine that Facebook and Google have built that is the bulk of their revenue. We'll see if that changes. I think there's a lot of speculation that it will, and that Twitter will actually become a lot more like Facebook and like Google. And you'll see more advertisements that are targeted based on the analyzation of your data. So prepare for that. It's a very likely outcome. But the opposite outcome is also likely true, because he's going to privatize the company, which means, unlike Facebook and Google, Twitter won't be under the kind of SEC scrutiny that the other competitors for ad tech are, and that could dramatically change what they're able to do with that data.
Well, it really is going to be interesting to see how he transforms the platform. I mean, it's you mentioned the Wild West earlier. He's the new marshal in town.
Well, look, the whole point of going public is to give transparency to consumers and investors. And when a company goes private, they are not required to be as transparent as a public company. But transparency, as I said before, is a cornerstone of data privacy and good data privacy that leads to customer retention and acquisition. So will Elon choose to bake an even higher ethical bar of privacy and higher ethical bar of transparency into Twitter that instead says, hey, we're not public, so we're not going to hold the bottom line of what is required from us. We're going to set a new standard. We're going to set a higher ethical bar on how data should be used and watch all the public companies follow us. That would be really amazing.
I mean, has he done that with Tesla? Has he done that with SpaceX?
I'm probably not the best person to make that judgment.
All right, hang on one more segment and we'll finish up the hour with Jared Coseglia, and we will be back with more after these notes. And we are back with you here on WSGW, a final segment with our friend Jared Coseglia, who is the owner of TRU Staffing Partners. So let me see if I can help your business a little bit. If you're talking to a group of young people why should they go into the data business or the security business, and what do they need to do to get there?
It's a great question, Art. The first of which is the people in this community are just awesome. They're really, really passionate about these things. They care deeply, not just about their jobs and their community, but the evangelism of good privacy habits and standards as part of our definition as a species. I mean, that's really the magnitude that I think a lot of leaders in the space look at it. And so I love it for that reason. You're going to find people who love what they do, who are eager to transfer knowledge to other people and mentor others. So for those reasons, this is a great industry. Aside from all that, it's cool for us to work on things that you see in the headline news that are talked about on John Oliver, who did a whole segment on data brokers 2 weeks ago, and to feel like you're part of something much bigger than yourself, much bigger than your company, much bigger than this community. This is an industry that touches every single person across the entire world and will continue to for our entire lifetime and well beyond that. How to get in. The best way to get training and education is with the International Association of Privacy Professionals, better known as the IAPP. And you can actually register for free online training and education through our website at trustaffingpartners.com. And they are one of our most important strategic partners. They have various certifications for both the legal aspects as well as the operational aspects and the technical aspects that give you the foundational knowledge necessary to break into this business. So I would start there. Second to that, as I mentioned before, privacy touches every part of every business. Stick your hand up and volunteer. Figure out who at your company deals with privacy and see if you can be a privacy champion or privacy evangelist in whatever department that you're servicing the business. Privacy touches everything, and nobody is going to say no to somebody who's sticking their hand up and saying, I want to contribute to a healthier, wealthier use of privacy within our organization.
Decent paying jobs?
These are extremely well-paying jobs. Yes, these are. I mean, look, entry-level jobs are going to fall somewhere in the $50,000 to $75,000 a year range. You get 2 to 3 years of experience, you'll be making close to 6 figures, if not more. If you're a lawyer moving into the space, you're probably adding another $60,000 on top of that to start. Professionals at the peak of their game are making millions of dollars in leadership roles in this space.
All right, last question. Am I more secure and more private with Apple or Windows?
It's not about whether you're more secure with them. It's about how you control the settings that they provide you. And if you've controlled both settings with, equality, then you'll be equally safe on either. Look, at the end of the day, the companies aren't the villains. In some ways, the companies are the heroes. Because they're the ones, not our government, they're the ones that are making decisions about what is the right ethical way to use data. And until the government steps in, which may not necessarily be what's best for business and may not necessarily be what's best for consumers, we have to work collaboratively with the companies that use this data to define what is the right use of this data.
Well, Jared, it's always fun talking to you.
I love it.
Every time. We'll do it again down the road. And thanks much for your time. And again, tell everybody your website if they want to know more about you.
I appreciate it, Art. It's TRU Staffing Partners, TRU, staffingpartners.com. And we're here to answer any questions for anybody that wants to break into the business or is desperately looking to hire privacy professionals.
Jared, thanks for being with us today.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you, Art.
Bye-bye now. Jared Coseglia, we thank him for joining us here on the Art Lewis Show for this particular Tuesday morning. We'll take a brief break and then be back to close out the hour after these notes.